Hi, welcome to part 2. I'm not too sure when that last part cut out. So as I was saying, the assessment tool is great. It's a little checklist that you complete with parents, and it helps to narrow down which area the child is seeking or avoiding sensory input. So once you complete the checklist, you should get a fair idea. If it's not really clear, then it's probably not much of an issue for the child. If you get a strong indication, then it certainly points quite strongly usually to one or two directions. If you ever need support with this, then your liaison RTLB will be able to help you with that as well, because we've all gone through some training to be able to have a look at that. So what happens when you discover that you have a child who is in need of some intervention around the sensory input? So we have sensory diets, which has nothing to do with food. What it is a recipe of activities that will either feed a sensory seeker or it will help a sensory avoider. So what we've got here is the first step, though, is to teach the child some self-modulation. And this is really important and one of the trickiest parts. And that is to help the child to understand and recognise how they're feeling at any given point of time. So to teach this, you are telling the child, you're in charge of your speed. The end goal is independence. So hopefully the child will be able to take over this process. But of course, at first, it's going to take a lot of coaching and a lot of teaching. So analogies are great to use. There are so many out there. You can use the dial, which is very similar to the Davis dial as well. You can use the engine as an analogy, or traffic lights, using the red and orange and green. And I'll show you a website in a minute that uses the colours. Also animals, so you can use like turtle, dog, cheetah, or Winnie the Pooh characters even. So you've got your Eeyore or you've got your Tigger. So once you kind of choose your analogy, then you can use that to teach the children about their speed, where they're at the moment, where they need to be at, and how to get there. So your over responders, typically they're the ones that are too fast. So they're green. They need calming activities. I've just put the colours there in brackets because the website that I will share with you in a second uses those. But if you just look at the words for now, so over responders, they start too fast, they need calming activities. Passive under responders, they start too slow, they need alerting activities. Sensory seekers, they start too fast, but these are the ones that need more alerting, so they need more green. But this is where it gets quite tricky, because these guys, the sensory diet needs to be really carefully organised and managed so that they're not over alerted. So it needs to be goal-directed, intermittent, lots of head position changes. Research shows us that head position changes, bang for buck, will give the sensors a lot more feedback than other types of activities. Lots of proprioceptive input, so that's your heavy lifting. So that could be pushing a table, moving furniture, cleaning a whiteboard, sweeping the floor, mopping a floor, carrying some books to the library, putting a bag on their back and walking around with that on their back. So anything like that, it will give them lots of proprioceptive input. These activities need to be contained in a smaller space so that they're not over alerted, and the function needs to be satisfied, and this needs some really careful planning. So for instance, my daughter was proprioceptive seeking. For her to calm herself down to get she needed alerting, a lot of physical proprioceptive activity. But for her, it was a whole body experience. So her arms, her legs, her hands would stim, her mouth, even her eyes, her face, everything would be very taut, very tight, stretched out with stimming. And this gave her a full body sensory input of proprioceptive. So she was seeking that all the time. When she was smaller, we thought, it's kind of obvious. We would try to give her a more socially appropriate way to still get that sensory input, but not so obvious. So we tried to teach her to squeeze. So it was to clasp the hands together and squeeze. But the thing was that never worked, because the input she was getting from squeezing was nowhere near the same as what her full body proprioceptive input was. So it never was going to work. So you have to be really careful that the same function is met, or it's just not going to work. Of course, sensory for all is really important. That everybody, the whole class, will actually benefit. So there's multisensory approaches to teaching, to learning, which is Universal Design for Learning is all about. That's a whole other presentation, so we can look out for that one, because we'll probably be talking about that next year. But also sensory breaks. So music, lunch, PE are all really good sensory breaks. If a child has misbehaving, then the worst thing you can do is actually take them out of the playground and let them miss out on their lunch or their morning break, because that's the very time that they need to be active and giving themselves that vestibular and proprioceptive feedback. For the whole class, if you have 5 to 6 year olds, every hour they should be having a 10-minute movement break. 7 to 9 year olds every 1.5 hours, and 10-year-olds plus, so that's right up to adult, every 2 hours they should be having a 10-minute movement break. And that's really good movement, not just walking around. It needs to be really good movement. So this is a really interesting website, sensationalbrain.com. There is a video that will be played after this presentation that just introduces a little bit about the website. There is a members area that you pay a subsidy towards. Really excellent resources here though, and there's also an iPad app that they've put out around sensory diets as well, which helps not only to identify but to form a really good program around a child who needs some sensory input. So these are some of the ideas that come from the website. So there's the first and then. So first of all, there's the work that needs to be done, and then there's the sensory of a mini trampoline, which is feeds you vestibular and proprioceptive. These are the traffic light systems that they use, and each card and activity is outlined in the appropriate colour. So if it's green, it's an alerting activity. If it's yellow, it's good for anybody at any time. Yellow is fine, cannot do any harm with yellow, and red is a calming. So you got here a whole class board. So first of all, the child needs to understand where they're at, using colour, traffic lights, Winnie the Pooh, whatever. And then they need to figure out, what do I need to do to get into that just right place where I'm ready to learn. So you can see here that they've got a selection of activities that the teachers put out to choose from. So if they need calming down, need relaxing, there's, 5 activities for them to choose. If it's just right, even if they're starting at the just right, but they need a sensory break, then there's some just right activities to keep them in that space. Or if they need to be alerted, then there's a couple of activities there as well that they can choose from. So this is something to help with independence and that self-modulating. So this is the end of my presentation. Just a note that if a child has a mixed sensory response, which can happen typically with ASD children. So they will have an avoidance to their to the distal sensory input. So they could have an aversion to sound or light, for instance, or taste, but they will also be seeking and normally proprioceptive input. So you can have children who are seeking some and are avoiding others. And as I said, that's normally your ASD kids. So the assessment tool is fantastic. Have a look at it. And if you need any help with either running it past a parent or reading the outcome, then we are more than happy to help. And if you have any questions, then I'm sure the team that are there will be able to answer. And if they can't, then feel free to send me an email, and I'll be able to reply to your questions. And have a look at the website, have a look at the video that will be played in a minute, and I'm sure that it is something you will find really interesting, and an area I think all schools, all classrooms need to be aware of, and especially around those movement breaks. So thanks for your afternoon. I hope you've really enjoyed this, and safe travels home. See you.